well, Joseph Stalin was from Georgia, and he, basically gave it South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And to say that the United States wasn't involved in any way helping launch that attack on South Ossetia there in Georgia is just amazing. I mean, Russia has many more claims for its security.
The Pentagon and Washington didn't want that attack. Somebody may have been sending signals to the Georgian government, but also there's a lot of evidence that the attack was provoked. There had been attacks from inside Ossetia beforehand against the surrounding Georgian villages. The Russians were amazingly ready to put thousands and thousands of troops in immediately. It has all the hallmarks of a trap. Now, the fact that Washington is absolutely incompetent and has not been behaving in a diplomatic manner should not be used stupidity of Moscow, which has actually managed to unite the West and the rest of the world in a way that's almost unprecedented at a time when more and more European and other governments were trying to put distance between themselves and the hawks in Washington. He's actually what they've done from Moscow is to manage to get the majority of the Czechs and the Poles to.
Oh, really? The European Union didn't put sanctions on Russia.
To get people in
the European Union didn't put sanctions on Russia.
Joining
it
NATO
hasn't united.
Now want to join it. So, I mean, what the Russians have done is not only illegal, it's inept, and they have consistently broken their promises. The person who's tried to reach out most to Russia, President Sarkozy of France, which has traditionally tried to play an intermediary role between Washington and Moscow, tried to do it this time, and every single
but the most important part,
it's ridiculous to claim. It's ridiculous to claim Russia has no claim on Ossetia.
The Russians will withdraw to the
when the United States and NATO
and they haven't
helped take over Kosovo. What about NATO stealing Kosovo? What about NATO stealing Kosovo? I mean, you're billing this as if Russia is the bad guy.
Another foreign country, and another foreign country, and supply.
It's Georgia that escalated this.
Guys, let's stay on 1 second. One foreign country go another foreign country and give it for citizenships, passports, just to give them 120, 140, 200,000 citizenship. Any reason to do it? Why it was done in 90? Based on which?
They're on the border. They're 90% Russian. They're 90% related to ethnic Russians. They're on the border.
No, they're not related to ethnic Russians.
Russian diplomats went down there.
I'd like to go to Ian Williams. All right, just a second. Ian Williams, I'd like to have your response. You said, well, the Russians have united the West with Washington, with the hawks in Washington. Alex says that is not the case. Now, we have articles that simply contradict that, especially Italy, Germany, even France to some extent. They're not that united with the U.S. Turkey says, well, I'm out. Count me out.
They're not united on the details of what to do about it, but they're certainly united on the fact that Russia has been a threat. I mean, you have to see what's happened.
There are no sanctions.
There are no sanctions. 40%. In the first 2 weeks, 16
there is only unilateral on the nuclear waste deal.
All right. Now let's.
I'd like to counter this.
All right, Alex, go ahead.
Let me just briefly say something here. Look, I'm no fan of Vladimir Putin. I'm no fan of what Russia's doing. The point is, Russia is not expanding. Russia has NATO encircling it, moving in missile systems, moving in advisors, moving in weapons, moving in ships, moving in aircraft. It's certainly a provocative move by the United States, by the criminals that run our country, and I don't want that done in our name. And then you have the United States swearing that they wouldn't make Kosovo independent, and last year made it independent. I mean, this is outrageous. That's why you saw Russia build up. Russia saw the Georgian forces building up, and Russia had spies in Georgia.
It said that Kosovo would have an act of self-determination. It had its act of self-determination. The people there who had previously been massacred and chased out at bayonet point by the Serbs, who regarded them as alien Turks and Muslims, voted overwhelmingly that
all sides were killing each other.
And we'll come back to this point.
Are you going to talk about ITN, fake photos of people in China?
And the Soviet Union broke up. For better or worse, the deal that was accepted by all of the parties was that the previous boundaries would be accepted. Kosovo had, in everything except name, was a constituent republic of Yugoslavia, the Federal Republic. In the Soviet Union,
10 Downing Street line.
The boundaries that Stalin drew.
The great game, huh, buddy?
In the 30s,
playing the little people off against each other.
difficulties otherwise are so bad. Can you imagine?
You need to visit
when the Russians, when Chechnya tried to get autonomy, they didn't say, "Oh, all of these people have separate passports, and we must respect their right to self-determination."
All right, now,
what about
and that was another U.S. finance deal.
All right,
just like having,
just like Washington.
Just like having the Mujahideen attack the Russians in 1979 to get a Russian response to set them up. Now, am I saying what the Russians did in Afghanistan was good? No. I'm saying I don't want a new Cold War. I don't want my children drafted. Okay, it's clear the United States is bullying Russia, trying to start a new Cold War so they can have weapons sales and prop up the dollar.
All right,
okay, we have a domestic police state here in the U.S.
All right, Alex,
we're losing our freedom.
Let's move on with the specifics of what's happening on the ground right now. This was the motivations behind what's taking shape. Of course, a lot of controversy surrounding it, as we have a controversy surrounding this discussion. But let's go to Reuters. Russia criticized the U.S. for pulling nuclear deal. The move was widely seen as penalty on Moscow for its sanctions in Georgia, but officials in both Washington and Moscow said the step could ultimately save the agreement, possibly for future U.S. administration, by preventing Congress from sinking the deal. Alex, let's go to Gregory for a change. Gregory, I'd like to have your take on the significance of U.S. withdrawing from this 1-2-3 deal with Russia, and whether or not Bush is helping save the deal because of Congress in this environment would anyway simply go around and sink the deal.
I think we have.
Would you like me to answer first?
Let's
have Gregory, and then I'll get back to Alex.
I'm here.
United States, and everything was done in the country right now. It's a lot of things done to elect right party. I think Bush done some things to elect McCain. Definitely, I think this decision going to help McCain to be elected for sure. But maybe this Bush election going to be resolved by new administration. I remember when President Reagan was running for the office, and everybody called him the evil, and he called Russia evil. But finally, he became one of the greatest presidents of the history of the United States. And let's see what's happening. It depends who gonna run administration, by Obama or McCain. We're gonna see new relationship with Russia, definitely. And a lot of things was done right now. A lot of decisions were done right now between Russia and the United States, between the Congress and Russian Duma, between the Medvedev and Bush. Is going to be resolved definitely after election. Let's see.
But things are getting so nasty. I wouldn't know what would be left of this relation for the next president. Alex, I'd like to have your take on this deal. But first, let's take a look at ABCnews.com that goes, U.S. cancels Russian nuclear deal. In a statement, U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice said, quote, "We make this decision with regret. Unfortunately, given the current environment, the time is not right for this agreement." So the U.S. simply pulling out of the 1-2-3 agreement with Russia. No nuclear deal, no more, at least for now.
Well, I was going to say that is clearly a sanction, but we don't see the European Union with one. Now, this is a deal to move this nuclear waste to Russia. You do see attacks on their stock market, and that's because the West is mad that some of their puppet oligarchs have been kicked out of Russia, and they're desperate to not have a bipolar world. They want a unipolar New World Order, as the Russian president has talked about, and has, we've got Gordon Brown running around calling for a British, U.S.-based New World Order, and so that's why we have them engaging in these provocative actions. I mean, moving ships into the Black Sea, moving more troops into the Caucasus, during a war, flying in 2,000 Georgian troops plus out of Baghdad, out of Iraq, into the middle of that. It's been confirmed military aid being brought in. This is an incredibly provocative action, and there's a lot of evidence that there were U.S. advisors involved on that sneak attack. And look, I'm living here in the U.S., and my media was reporting that Russia snuck attacked Georgia, basically. And so then to have this spin that somehow Russia is completely at fault. I'm not saying Russia is perfect, but to have the spin that this is, Russia way out of bounds, way out of their territory. I mean, we have the United States going into Iraq, going into Afghanistan, and then 10,000 miles away, and then lecturing Moscow for going 50 miles, 60 miles outside of their border, when they're having their peacekeepers murdered, is just incredible. And so I don't want sanctions against Russia.
Now, we have to take a break. When we come back, we'll go back to Ian Williams on the winners and losers of all of this, plus this nuclear deal, the withdrawal. Don't go away.
Target U.S. missile shield sites in Poland, Czech Republic with its intercontinental ballistic missiles. Washington says the shield is for protecting the U.S. from missile threats, but Moscow regards it a threat to its security and has repeatedly warned the U.S. against it. A grenade attack on a mosque in northern Pakistan has killed at least 15 people. The attack took place in the district of Dir near the border with Afghanistan. At least 40 others were injured in that attack. Zimbabwe's political rivals say a power-sharing deal is imminent. President Robert Mugabe hopes the talks will be finished by Wednesday. He says there are only a few areas of disagreement left. Opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai says a deal could be reached very soon. Iran's President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad stresses the United Nations' role in settling regional and international disputes. In a meeting with the UN Special Envoy to Iraq, who said most problems in Iraq could be solved if the occupiers leave the country based on a timetable. Israeli troops have shot dead a Palestinian during a raid in the West Bank city of Nablus. The incident came after Israeli troops clashed with Palestinian stone throwers. Over 500 people have been killed since the relaunch of Israeli-Palestinian peace talks last November. A landslide in China's northern Shanxi province has killed 128 people. The landslide was caused by a mine collapse and trapped hundreds of people under debris. Rescuers are still searching for survivors. Officials have blamed reckless mining for the landslide. Flash floods killed at least 19 people in southwestern Iran. Heavy rains which caused the disaster injured 4 people. The waters destroyed over 50 homes and 300 hectares of farmland and left hundreds of rural families homeless.
We're back with Fine Print, discussing the latest in a series of Cold War tit for tat between U.S. and Russia. For that, we're joined from Austin, Texas by Alex Jones, investigative journalist, documentary filmmaker, owner of Infowars.com. From New York, we're joined by Gregory Vinikoff, political analyst, TV commentator, radio host. By the phone, we're joined from New York by Ian Williams, author and political analyst, senior analyst with foreign policy and focus, and columnist with The Guardian Online. Ian, back to the issue of the deal, the nuclear deal, the U.S. pulling out, simply saying it's not the right environment for it, the winners and losers of this. But before you shoot, let's go to a comment coming from Russian Foreign Ministry, cited by Reuters. The agreement on peaceful nuclear energy was equally beneficial to Russia and the United States, so the American nuclear sector will suffer no less than the Russian one from its withdrawal, the Russian Foreign Ministry. And if you'd like to put this in the broader picture of the winners and losers on the whole in this game, we'll be glad to hear.
Well, all of us are losing from this. I mean, the basic fault here was American diplomacy after the fall of the Soviet Union treated Russia as a defeated power. And the first Russian regime under Yeltsin practically went along with it and produced, with the shock therapy, destroyed the Russian economy. There was no serious thought given to how the Soviet Union was to be peacefully sort of taken apart and how it was to maintain cooperation. It caused chaos and poverty. And of course, a basic point of Russian politics now is that now that they've got the oil money, they feel they can stand up and flex their muscles. It's very popular. They remember past glories. The U.S. never learned from that. The U.S. has been totally inept in its diplomacy. And there are some people in the U.S. who still think that, the Russians are basically communists and they're still fighting them. So the nuclear deal was very unpopular with some people in the hard conservative right of American politics. And I think it's sort of nuanced signal. You have the Cheney mob who are pretty much old-style anti-communists, and also because they're colorblind, they can't tell the difference between red and green. They think Islamists are also communists. Condoleezza Rice is a bit more pragmatic about this, and I think it's quite true that this deal hasn't been ripped up, it's been shelved, it's an attempt to send a signal. But in the end, it was a very good deal, and it provided benefits for both parties, and I think that if sane councils prevail in the next few months, it can be resurrected, and will be. I mean, it was there to address a very serious problem on reprocessing, and both sides had something to bring to the table with it. But the bluster and counter-bluster, I mean, it takes a lot to make this White House look sane, but there are some in the Pentagon threatening to nuke parts of Russia at the moment. We have Russian generals doing that. And, it might look great if by sending a warship to Venezuela and sending planes there. Military is totally ineffective. It's sort of cocking a snook, and it might make them feel good, but it doesn't do anything diplomatically at all. The issue is that there are serious issues to be resolved, and one of the things which I think Russia has shown really serious bad faith, as Sarkozy has discovered today, is that 200 European Union monitors who are supposed to go in, they're not going to be allowed into the enclave, where there is serious evidence that whatever happened before, there's been continuous ethnic cleansing of ethnic Georgians from Ossetia that already had been from Abkhazia beforehand. Now, this is a very complex situation with bad people on both sides, and to be a victim, you don't have to be an actor.
Now, speaking of Sarkozy, let's go to ABC News. Sarkozy brokers Russian withdrawal agreement. Russia has agreed to remove its military forces from Georgia proper within a month under a new European Union agreement brokered by French President Nicolas Sarkozy. Mr. Sarkozy, whose country holds the rotating EU presidency, led the EU delegation to Moscow to meet with Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. After 3 hours of talks, Mr. Medvedev said he would withdraw his troops from Georgia, but not from its two breakaway provinces. He said this would be done by the 2nd week of October, but that it would be conditional on the deployment of 200 EU monitors to the region. There was also agreement that Russia would move its checkpoint outside Georgian port city of Poti within a week. Mr. Medvedev defended Russia's controversial decision to recognize the independence of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, saying that that move was irrevocable. Alex Jones, I'd like to have your take here on the Sarkozy mediation, EU and EU-US. Earlier, we had Ian saying the EU is united with the U.S. talks against Russia, and you took an issue with that.
Okay. I mean, I'm hearing some amazing things here by the last guy, and let me just cover that, and it answers the question. The Pentagon Hawks and NATO in the last year, and you can go to the policy numbers, changed the policy to a preemptive nuclear strike on Russian forces. Instead, this is meant to be a provocation. And so now they've moved in missile defense, which is only good for a sneak attack, and they claimed it was to stop Iran. I mean, how ridiculous. And now the Pentagon admits it's really for Russia. So if Russia is hit by a sneak attack, a nuclear attack, or other attack, they can't respond back with their ICBMs, ICBMs, MIRV-tip missiles. And so you have these missile systems being moved to Ukraine, Poland, other places, regular military training, hardware, incredibly provocative. Imagine if Russian troops were massing on the Mexico border with Texas or California. And then meanwhile, back in July, it was announced, I saw the Russian Foreign Minister say this, I didn't believe him, I went and checked it. Back in July, they announced these naval maneuvers. So the media is now saying, oh, the Peter the Great missile cruiser, coming in here is a provocative move. Well, it is a provocative move, but from previous escalation with NATO and the United States moving weapons systems in. And so you got Sarkozy. I mean, thank God that Italy and others are saying this is ridiculous, we're partners with Russia, but you've got Sarkozy trying to act like he's being diplomatic and, claiming he's meeting with the Russians under good faith. There's more escalation. I like what we've seen from Merkel there in Germany saying that this needs to be de-escalated. But to then say, oh, Russia won't pull out of South Ossetia and Abkhazia because they massacred all these people, and no doubt there's probably been some abuses there. I mean, we saw ethnic cleansing and extermination by the Georgians in South Ossetia, but that's not the reason they're not pulling out, because they want to cover up massacres. They're there because the globalist New World Order puppet there in Georgia, their president, has said he plans to try to retake South Ossetia. And regardless of what anybody says, whatever provocations they make up, we know there was some skirmishes and police shooting at each other in the months before. Georgia turned the water off to South Ossetia and other areas, and then on top of that launched the sneak attack in the early morning hours of 8/88, and that's incontrovertible. That can't be debated. They initiated first blood, the major response, and that's what we don't need. The military-industrial complex needs more wars. They need to gin up support so they can attack Iran. This is part of a bigger picture trying to ring Central Asia and start World War III.
Now, let's go to Gregory Vinnikov. Gregory, before we move on with the missile shield, so on and so forth, a lot of factors involved here. Let's take a look at Sarkozy's effort along with Barroso, and we had also EU Foreign Policy Chief Xavier Solana alongside with him. The outcome of this sort of peace mission, Washington already saying no to what Russia and the EU have hammered out. So what do you see at the end of this?
End of it is not yet. First of all, it's very costly business. This war is very costs a lot of money for Russia. Money running out from Russian market. Investors take out money from Russian market. The Russian market lost at least, from official figures, at least $70 billion. And $30 billion was taken out by investors. Practically for 1 week, total loss was $100 billion for a Russian market. War is very, very cost for Russia, and market still going down, and the Russian market lost all interest right now to West investors. This is the main trouble for Russia. They are using huge amount of money. 90% of the Russian money is the gas and the oil, and oil going down. As far as I remember, maybe I'm wrong, but by end of the Brezhnev era, it's Soviet Union era, I think the oil barrel was $9. I don't know how much by inflation it's right now, but it's if I can imagine if barrel go down right now on the below $60 a barrel, I think it's going to be a very difficult economical situation to Russia. Now, Russian military, Russian army right now also ask for the money. The Secretary of Defense of Russian Federation, Anatoly Serdyukov, asked Russian Parliament today to give them 1.4 trillion rubles to rebuild the Russian army. He says this money need to bring some new military equipment for the Russian army, put some new things to Russian forces. It's a very costly situation, and the Russian market is still going down.
Right.
And
but Gregory, let's take a look
Russian ruble is getting soft. Russian economy a very difficult situation. It's a very highly cost business to Russia, and the end of it, I just simply don't know, and I don't see the end of I don't see the lighter end of the tunnel.
All right, you're talking about the cost for Russia. Of course, the market simply not looking good at this point. But Times Online goes, how the West is losing the energy Cold War. Russia's victory in Georgia is having far-reaching effects as its neighbors rethink the wisdom of selling gas and oil to Europe. So let's count the chickens after they have been hatched, Sir Gregory. So how do you see the end of this market game, so to speak?
I don't see the Europeans lost the Cold War to Russia, because first of all the price for the oil and gas going down. So the price goes down, they pay less. It's not. They don't mean they're losing the war. I mean they're winning the war. Russia also.
But the demand is still there
because of the situation. Because
but the demand is still there,
Russia
isn't it?
proved a few more times, and I think I think today one of the vice prime minister of the Russian government say Russia very good partner. He said the message to the Europeans: don't be nervous. We're gonna stay with all our agreements. We're gonna supply everything. All these rumors, Russia wanna cut down the production and supplies to Europeans. They try to stop immediately. Russia still wanna be a very good, very good partners for supply the oil and the gas, special gas to the Europe. Russia very nervous, and I'm not sure they're losing they're winning the Cold War.
Now let's take it to Ian Williams. Ian, I'd like to have your take on this energy issue, which is very important. But let's take a look at Forbes that goes, Russia seeks regular dialogue with OPEC ministry, and Reuters goes, OPEC and Russia seek closer ties. OPEC is willing to cooperate with major oil exporter Russia, OPEC Secretary General said on Wednesday after Moscow sent a high-level delegation to its meeting. Russia often attends OPEC as an observer and was represented on Wednesday by the influential Deputy Prime Minister Igor Sakhin. Russia presented OPEC with a memorandum of understanding for future cooperation, and here is what OPEC Secretary General Abdullah al-Badri had to tell reporters. As far as OPEC is concerned, quote, we're willing to review this memorandum of understanding. We will try to see how we can cooperate through this MOU. Ian, so Russia and Saudi Arabia, we know they provide half the world oil, Russia being the second oil exporter, and EU very heavily dependent on Russia, more than half of its gas imports, 40% to 50% of its oil imports from Russia.
But remember, the corollary for this is one of the reasons why the Central Asians and the Russians want to carry on selling gas and oil to the Europeans is because they have the money to pay for it. And the point is, the Western European economies are much more balanced. Even at the height of North Sea oil, Britain only got 4% of its GDP from oil when it was almost self-sufficient. Even after Margaret Thatcher, it still had a much more balanced economy. But Russia and the oil states are totally dependent on selling oil and gas. So they actually need Western Europe as much, if not more, than vice versa. I mean, this is a very precarious situation for both of them. So, yes, of course, Russia wants to reassure. The last thing it wants is Western Europe to decide that the supplies are unreliable and to start talking to the Libyans and the Nigerians and the Venezuelans and others to counter that.
Venezuelans, you want to count Venezuelans out of this, don't you? You may want to...
Also, Saudi Arabia, the Putin, I think, went to Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago, tried to make a deal with Saudi Arabia. I'm sorry for interruption. And when they shake their hands, Saudi Arabia agreed to buy, I think, 1,000 Russian tanks. So far it was not a single deal between Saudi Arabia and the Russian Federation. And I think
Russia is a one-crop economy.
Relationship between the Russian Federation government and Saudi Arabian government. So far we get nothing. It's just messages exchange, nothing else.
All right, Alex, I'd like to have your take on this energy. Of course, Dick Cheney was in the region. Where Dick Cheney is, you can smell oil. That's what they say. They say he has a good nose. So I'd like to have your take on this whole energy deal as the huge factor in all of this.
Well, look at what the neocons did. They're overturning our Bill of Rights, our Constitution, destroying our dollar, buying the world up with our dollars, then leaving the American people with the bill, and they send this incredibly unpopular person all over Central Asia and into the Caucasus, into Georgia, to basically saber rattle. And the earlier guests are right. Russia, is in a precarious position. They do basically have a one-crop economy, except for some other raw materials, metals and chemicals and things that are coming out of there. They do need to partner with Europe, but Europe needs to partner with them. And it's true that OPEC doesn't particularly for now want to team up with Russia because they've got the largest position of the petrochemicals, of the oil that's coming out, and that's what this is all about. Going and punching the Russian bear in the nose, getting it to attack, then they can misrepresent it and say, see, don't invest in Russia. Don't make OPEC deals with Russia. Don't work with Russia. They're bad. Let's militarily encircle them. So on that front, Russia fell into the trap. But domestically, it made the new president, who is, of course, Putin's minion, very, very popular because he now has won a big war, in their view, for the motherland. So that's the larger picture. In the United States, The American people, on average, don't believe anything our government says anymore, so they're just in horror at a new Cold War. Perhaps heating up. So you're right, and your London Guardian guest and the other gentleman are both absolutely correct. And much of what they're saying, except for the casting of Russia as the bad guy here. I'm not saying they've acted perfectly, but overall, they are the ones being prodded and poked and manipulated. Russia is clearly trying to expand its economy, diversify its economy, and it's being isolated.
Speaking of poking, let's take a look at another huge poking, that being the missile shield story. USA Today, Czech government approved second missile defense deal. AFP goes, Russia threatens to target U.S. missile shield sites. And back to USA Today, the Czech Republic's government approved the second and final part of a missile defense treaty with the United States on Wednesday, but the agreement still requires approval of Parliament, where it faces strong opposition. Czech government already has approved the main bilateral treaty allowing the U.S. to build a radar base near Prague. The second complementary treaty approved Wednesday regards tax and the legal status of U.S. forces to be deployed at the base. So back to Ian Williams. Speaking of poking in who's prodding who into this, the radar and the 10 interceptor missiles, what exactly is the U.S. seeking? They're saying it against rogue states like Iran. Russia says nonsense.
Well, I think Putin actually sort of called their bluff, and he said, well, okay, let's have a joint, let's build joint bases on the Caspian, which would be more effective against Iran. And that is absolute. Well, before 2 weeks ago, it looked like absolute needless provocation. And not just that, but actually stupid, because the other thing about missile defense, apart from being provocative and very expensive, they don't work. The only tests of these anti-missile defenses that have worked are where they told the computer what time the missile is being fired, where it's coming, and they've actually heated them up artificially.
So Ian, what exactly is the U.S.
the missile defense is a camera that's made billions and billions for companies like Boeing. But it is provocative, it sort of showed intent, and it was indefensible, and that's what I'm saying about the ineptitude of Russian diplomacy. What the Russians have done now is they've actually converted majorities in Poland and the Czech Republic who opposed this before into people saying, yes, we need an American presence here because we want some guarantee that if the Russians come, we'll be defended. And that's
why the United States,
I cannot
see
the Russians hope to have gained from their recent behavior. If they had just gone into Ossetia, chased the Georgian troops out, if they weren't even in Abkhazia, the Georgian troops. If they'd stopped on the borders of the enclaves, then they would have looked good. They would have been able to live up to their justification as peace.
May I tell you something else?
I agree with you.
Let us also have Gregory Vink, but Ian, I'd like to have this response from Gregory too, but you talked about Poland and the Czech Republic being united against simply Russia. The polls are saying different things. You're saying the people are not opposed, it's the governments that they already were actually for the treaty, simply made their job easier.
The governments were for the treaty, but I think the polls, because the opinion polls as opposed to the people polls. The opinion polls were showing that the people were very ambivalent about these deals and opposed to it. But after the invasion of Georgia, then the opinion polls shifted round and offered support for their government.
All right, we have a minute left.
Pro-American all along.
It's very clearly Europe divided for young Europe and old Europe. Young Europe are all Eastern European countries and Baltic countries. This country was under Soviet occupation for the long time, and they are looking tough for the Russians. They don't want to be flexible. They're not looking for the compromise. They like to be far away. They need umbrellas. They like to feel well. They like to feel safe. They want missiles. They need a guarantee. Something never happened with them. The same thing like what's happening with Georgia. It's absolutely clear. And so Europe divided by the missiles, divided by the point of view of Russia, and Europe, my prediction, if I may,
that's the great game, divide and conquer.
To be divided for the few European by the
New Order funding.
Very interesting situation.
All right. Now, Alex, 20 seconds.
We can.
All right.
Look, it's clear. When I say our government's been hijacked, the American people aren't doing this. Our government has invaded Iran, Afghanistan, and it's provocative actions against Russia, and they look like the villain. I know all these governments are corrupt. Nobody's perfect. The point is, this is a escalation part of the PNAC plan that Dick Cheney and others wrote up. They told us they were going to do this. We covered it at Infowars.com. The world is in danger by the people running our White House.
On that note, our thanks to Austin, Texas, Alex Jones, investigative journalist, documentary filmmaker, owner of Infowars.com. From New York, we're joined by Gregory Vinikoff, political analyst, TV commentator, radio host. By the phone, we're joined from New York by Ian Williams, author and political analyst, senior analyst with Foreign Policy in Focus, and columnist with The Guardian online. Gentlemen, thanks for your time. The year's end, the insight you brought to another edition of Fine Print. For our viewers, always watch out for the fine print right here in Press TV with me, Amir Arfa.
150 years ago, the business corporation was a relatively insignificant institution. Today, it is all-pervasive. Like the church, the monarchy, and the Communist Party in other times and places, the corporation is today's dominant institution. This documentary examines the nature, evolution, impacts, and possible futures of the modern business corporation. Initially given a narrow legal mandate, what has allowed today's corporation to achieve such extraordinary power and influence over our lives? We begin our inquiry as scandals threaten to trigger a wide debate about the lack of public control over big corporations.